Hello, I'm Professor Simon Croom from the University of San Diego, and in this tutorial I want to focus on some of the ways in which you can really enhance learning when transitioning from the analog face-to-face to digital delivery of your course curriculum. In order to make your transition from the analog to digital experience as vibrant as possible for your students, let's take a look at 6 aspects of curriculum design that I think are going to be very helpful. Firstly, thinking about what flipping your class will mean in this context. Secondly, the asynchronous versus synchronous use of digital technologies and digital mediated learning. Thirdly, the role that journals and self-reflection can play in student learning. Fourthly, how to structure or design worksheets and handouts for each of your topics. 5, the role of effective questioning and what sorts of questions you could address. And finally, thinking about action learning groups and how they can become extremely valuable in this transition. So, flipping your classroom, what exactly does that mean? It's one really where the students review content rather than you lecturing content. So they come to the experience having already undertaken some preparation. Now it's absolutely critical here to make sure you define very clearly what the learning objectives are for each of your units or weeks of learning. You also have to provide content for the topic. Now this can be video that you've recorded, video lectures. It could be video from YouTube. It can be other existing media online. Readings, whether it's online readings, textbooks, articles, prior distributed handouts and so forth. Or it might even be an activity. Go out and observe, take notes about a operational process or around a built environment in the neighborhood. In addition to directing your students to do something before class, you also want them to review and critique the activity so that then you can bring the students together for discussion or presentations through the discussion boards, group discussions, a synchronous tutorial, and through their learning journal. It's important to know that the student reaction is critical here. What you're looking to do is assess how well the students have absorbed and can apply the learning that you provide them with. You can't just build it and hope that they come. You need to adopt various mechanisms to evaluate that the students have comprehended the content, and particularly be very mindful of scaffolding student progression. In other words, making sure that you're building on prior knowledge and you're not running too far ahead in the students' learning. And at this stage, it may mean that you've got to carry out some form of assessment of where the students are. And I can't reiterate this enough, and I will repeat myself during this session. You must always link it to student learning objectives. What are you expecting them to be able to do? What are you expecting them to be able to demonstrate? This is not just for your benefit or the students' benefit. It's integral to how you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of the learning. Now, linked in with flipped classrooms, but not the only thing associated with flipped classrooms, is the notion of synchronous delivery of learning experiences. And this can be through tutorial discussions. You may want to use some form of collaborative workspace. You might want to use online teleconferencing. You may encourage small group discussions, and this again could be independent of you, but the students collectively meet online in a predetermined scheduled session to follow some specific tasks that you've guided. Certainly synchronous delivery and synchronous opportunities online are great for office hours. Many faculty I know already use online office hours because it gives both the student and the faculty a lot of flexibility, and using Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, etc. Great way of doing this. We use Synchronous means of student delivery for project supervision. So helping the students work their way through maybe a semester long, if not a year long, research project. You can still be the sage, albeit on a virtual stage, with synchronous delivery. So using Zoom, which seems to be at the moment the common reaction to going online, enables you to give a lecture. And we'll talk later on about how to structure virtual lectures in another tutorial. And finally, thinking about the role that webinars play in student learning experiences as a synchronous activity. And the webinar doesn't actually have to be the professor running the webinar. It could be a guest speaker. It could be the mentors that you utilize for your course. Asynchronous, clearly where we're separating the delivery and the consumption. So a flipped topic where you've got a narrated lecture, for example, self-directed study where you've provided lecture notes or reading materials or a study guide for the students in advance. Project-based learning can be asynchronous. In other words, you send the students out over a period of time to undertake an investigation. And certainly group study times can be really powerful, and allowing the students, or directing the students, I should say, to work within their learning groups. However we're going to deliver our learning, I'm a great believer in the role of learning journals. I've used that in my traditional on-campus classes, and it's really the students' personal collated notes and resources. I noticed that students were not very good at taking lecture notes, so I gave them guidance on how to use journals. And this can be certainly one major way in which they provide evidence of meeting the learning objectives for your course. A learning journal will incorporate not just notes on their learning, but also their reflections and critical analysis. What do they think? Most of the journals that my students have produced are not just textual. They include copies of PowerPoint slides, they include embedded video or embedded audio of recorded lectures, and increasingly provide a wealth of resources that they found online, such as videos, blogs, news feeds, websites, and so forth. And the great thing about the journal is the students follow their own interest and curiosity. So you want to try and facilitate that by giving direction that enables the student to follow their passion. In terms of the worksheets that you provide students, how you're going to guide them through a topic. I think many faculty give handouts during the class, and they may simply give notes, printouts from PowerPoint that they're using in class. But many of us also use worksheets. You know, what are the salient points? What do you expect them to do with those worksheets? And it maybe even have some guided student activity. But again, you need clear objectives. Each handout needs a rationale. What will the student do? What will the student achieve? They're undoubtedly supporting material for textbooks and the core online resources. And this is where you as the professor can actually insert your perspective, insert your authority, because this is where you're directing, you're orchestrating, you're conducting the students' learning. Really, you want your handouts or your worksheets to be pretty focused on the core concepts, theories, ideas, methods, or techniques that are germane to the topic of the week. And undoubtedly, you're guiding the students' note-taking. If you give them a prompt, they then respond to that prompt, and this is pretty critical. And thinking about the questions that you might want to pose, whether it's in the worksheets or whether it's elsewhere in preparation for tutorials after you flip the classroom, think about the types of questions that you can have. And I've just really identified 5 of the dominant questioning methods here. And depending on your discipline, you can dig even further into alternative approaches to questioning. But there are those analytical questions. What are the goals, purpose, or inferences, etc., relating to the topic? There are knowledge-oriented questions, those that are designed to generate a correct answer. A good example here is, what is the square root of 546? There are subjective opinion questions. What is your favorite movie? Give me an opinion about a particular topic. And this may be a great way for you to find how well the students are adapting to their online experiences. We have judgment-oriented questions, questions focused on debate. Should capital punishment be abolished? And of course, we've got the distinction between simple versus complex questions. Definitional questions versus multifaceted questions. Is torture compatible with respect for human rights? Is a relatively simple definitional question. Contrast that with which of our laws are just and which are unjust. That's a complex, multifaceted question. The reason I'm addressing this is not to make you aware of different sorts of questions, but get you to think about how you are going to use different forms of questions at different stages in the student's learning. And particularly online, think about what is an appropriate form of questioning. This is where I think the action learning sets can start to really come into their own. These are small study groups or teams, and many of us use teams in our classes. But the idea of an action learning set is that this becomes a social group around your course, and they provide a strong supportive network, which at this time where we're transitioning in reaction to the pandemic, is going to be pretty important. Students can support each other. They can motivate each other's learning. It certainly helps if you've given clear direction that the action learning sets can make the students far more task-oriented in their behaviors. You can even use the action learning sets for peer review and peer assessment. And we do know that students learn best from each other, so let's capitalize on that. It also facilitates clear feedback. If you're giving feedback to a group as opposed to an individual, you can give richer feedback. It also enables the students to discuss their interpretation of that feedback and seek clarity. So it's a very effective mechanism for driving student feedback. So hopefully these points have given you a little bit more food for thought as you transition your teaching and learning to an online environment. And I want to thank you for your attention, and by all means reach out to me if you've got any questions.